Fly agaric. Hardly any other mushroom is as well known worldwide as the fly agaric. Every child knows him and is always falsely warned of his great toxicity. The red fly agaric symbolizes the warning symbol of the poisonous fungi. On the other hand, no one can escape the fascination of this sight. When we unexpectedly come across some specimens in the forest, and the young, bright red, egg-shaped fruit bodies are almost born out of the ground. In old age, the fungus forms a cup in which the morning dew collects. We like the fly agaric. It makes us happy, although, or precisely because it meets us so often in life. We remember happy moments in life for which the mushroom is a symbol. The fly fungus is one of the best-known poison mushrooms. The fly agaric is a symbiosis fungus that can appear in the deciduous, coniferous, and mixed forests. The fly agaric is one of the most common representatives from the genus of tuber leaf fungi, and is a real mass fungus in many places. You can find fly agarics from early summer to late autumn. The fly agaric reaches a hat diameter of up to 20 centimeters. Young fly agarics grow up underground under the moss, and are completely whitish to white-yellowish. With age, the fly agarics break out of the ground, and then turn orange-red to red. On the top of the hat there are almost always white, flaky scales. However, these sheds can also be completely missing, especially due to heavy rain. The flakes can't be washed off, for example. The slats of the fly agaric are whitish to white-yellowish colored and are usually exposed. The spore powder is whitish. The stem of the fly agaric can be up to 20 centimeters long and often reaches a diameter of 3 to 4 centimeters. The stem is whitish to white-yellowish, and has a beet-like tuber at the stem base, which is provided with a wart belt. The fly agaric has yellowish-colored meat directly under the red hat skin. Otherwise, the meat is whitish. The fly agaric has a pleasantly funky smell and taste, which invites you to eat despite the toxicity. In naturopathy, the fly agaric was and is used to treat nerve disorders, pain, and colds. The fly agaric contains psychoactive substances that can lead to delusions, psychosis, impaired consciousness, but also to exuberant euphoria. In this context, fly agarics have been mentioned several times as intoxicants in the history of mankind. However, the consumption of the fly agaric can only be discouraged in this context. The boundaries between somewhat intoxicating and dangerously toxic can be fluid. Depending on the location, the amount of different ingredients may vary and each body reacts slightly differently to the substances contained. Harmless poisoning leads to gastrointestinal disorders. In severe poisoning, circulatory failure up to respiratory paralysis is possible. In our view, the fly agaric is therefore completely unsuitable as an intoxicant, especially for laymen in the field. The fly agaric used to be a popular home remedy for flying. A deep plate with some milk, sugar, and fly agarics was placed on the windowsill. The mixture should attract flies and poison them. However, the flies were usually not killed by the mixture, but only stunned for a few hours. In Finland, the alcoholic tincture from the fungus was used for the external treatment of bruises and compressions. For production, the red hat skin of the fly agaric was placed in vodka for a few days. The internal use of small amounts relieves headaches and stomach pain. In Siberia, the legs were massaged with a cold water extract during snake bites. Some North American Indian strains, such as the Cree, use the fly agaric for rinsing eye infections. Reports on the internal use of the fly agaric in psychosomatic states of exhaustion come from Siberia. Until the 19th century, it was used both as a home remedy and as a medically prescribed drug, e.g., internally for epilepsy and fever and externally for fistula ulcers. Under the name fungus muscaria, it was even official, i.e. part of the pharmaceutical treasure. In homeopathy, Agaricus muscarius is still a remedy for complaints of the entire nervous system. It is successfully used as homeopathic potency, D4, D6, D30, D200, according to the drug picture against symptoms of menopause, hyperexcitability as well as bladder and intestinal cramps, among other things. There are individual indications according to which taking the homeopathic remedy improves Parkinson's symptoms. All homeopathic preparations are subject to pharmacy, but do not require a prescription, not even the original tincture. Neither collecting nor consuming the fly agaric is illegal. Waldschmidt observed an intensification of the dream experience in his patients after taking the original tincture. Negative physical and psychological side effects apparently did not occur the next day. Apparently, the fungus is still used medically. For example, it is used in Siberia, Novosibirsk, against various cancers, glandular diseases, and rheumatism. The author has descriptions of a successful internal use of the alcoholic fungal extract in Pfeiffer's glandular fever. Low dose, the application does not cause mind-altering effects, but a mood-enhancing effect is reported. Externally, the application helps with rheumatism. In Lithuania, the fungus is used for rubbing in joint and back pain. For this purpose, 3 to 4 fly agaric heads are first stored in the refrigerator for 2 days, then cut into small pieces, placed in a glass, and filled finger-width with vodka. The approach remains in the refrigerator for 2 weeks. The mushrooms are then removed. Painful joints should be rubbed regularly with it. For stockpiling, it is recommended to fill fly agaric heads into a large glass and bury the glass deep, about 1 m, into the ground. Under favorable conditions, a liquid mass with a specific smell is created after 1 month. This mass is poured through a gauze, and the resulting liquid is diluted 1:1 with alcohol. The tincture lasts for several years. As already mentioned, in addition to fresh mushrooms, alcoholic extracts can also be used. For this purpose, about 2 to 3 fly agarics are spent in a bottle of vodka for several days. The alcoholic extract can then be used internally or externally. Traditionally, a vodka extract is used in Russia for the external treatment of joint pain. Powdered fungal material is also used, for example for the external treatment of ulcer, poorly healing wounds. On the Kamchatka Peninsula, small pieces of the fly agaric are sucked in case of inflammation in the throat. The internal application of the fly agaric is not unproblematic due to its very fluctuating active ingredient content. For this reason, use in this regard must always be used with the utmost caution. There are reports that reindeer also eat the fly agaric in case of digestive problems. In addition to these purely physical applications, the fly agaric has played an extremely important role in the healing rituals of shamans all over the world since time immemorial. In addition to the purely physical ones, the fungus helped them to search for, find, and ritually overcome the mental causes of a disease. Only slowly do we return to this holistic view, and have to recognize that much of what we have ridiculed for a long time heals people and makes them whole again. Hager's Handbook of Pharmaceutical Practice 1998 contains monographs on the following Amanita species: Amanita citrina, Amanita pantherina, Amanita muscaria, and Amanita phthalides. Contrary to its name, the fly agaric contains very little muscarine, 0.0002% in relation to the fresh mass. Muscarine was discovered in 1869 by Schmiedeberg and Kopp in tiny quantities in the fly agaric. Muscarine exists in 2 optically active configurations, of which only 1 muscarine occurs in the fly agaric. However, the concentration is so low that it is toxicologically meaningless. The most important toxin in the fly and panther fungus is iotric acid. This was only discovered independently by the Swiss Eugster and the Japanese Takemoto in the mid-1970s. The content in the fly agaric reaches values of up to 0.3% in dried mushrooms. However, the values fluctuate enormously. In the case of panther fungus A. pantherina, the contents seem to be slightly lower. The content of muscimol in the fly agaric is 0.1%. In the panther fungus, it is apparently slightly higher. Studies, in turn, show strongly fluctuating values. The meat of the mushroom hats contains higher concentrations of idenic acid and muscimol than the hat skin. In the stems, the contents of both fabrics are lower than in the hats. Sauer and Wheeleman state the total content of isoxazoles, isotenic acid, muscimol, etc., at 0.03 to 0.18% in relation to the dry matter. When cooking, drying, or storing the fungi, iotric acid forms the muscimol that is about 5 times more effective and the pharmacologically hardly active muscazone. Muscimol is also produced in the body itself from the supplied idonic acid and can then be detected in the urine. Both substances are water-soluble. They are not currently subject to the Narcotics Act. Apparently, they are also responsible for the insect-killing effect of the fly agaric. A basic prerequisite for both substances to have an intense effect on the brain is their ability to pass through the blood-brain barrier. Muscimol is an agonist of the messenger substance gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA, which is naturally found in the body. Like this, it is able to bind to special GABA receptors and have an inhibitory effect on certain areas of the brain. It also leads to an increase in the content of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, and a reduction in norepinephrine. Matsumoto et al. Had another compound with 4-hydroxypyrrolidone, whose chemical structure is very similar to that of iodonic acid and muscimol. Compounds with this chemical framework are common in microscopic molds and act against bacteria and fungi. Probably they are all made of glutamic acid as a precursor. A synthetic derivative of muscimol is a specific agonist of the GABA receptor by binding to it and leading to its activation. It has an anti-pain inhibiting effect and restores the normal sleep structure in Parkinson's patients with sleep disorders. Ibotenic acid binds mainly to the NMDA receptor, and methyl D-aspartic acid, whose natural binding partner is the glutamic acid and has an activating effect there. In addition, the compound is highly neurotoxic. The ingredients contained in the fly agaric disturb the coordinated interplay of natural neurotransmitters in the brain. The associated psychotropic effect can be achieved not only by eating, but also by smoking dried hat skins or fungal bodies. Smoking is a pharmacologically very fast and effective way to absorb active ingredients that can't be vaporized. Dried fly and panther mushrooms were mixed and smoked with tobacco and a whole range of other partly centrally active herbs such as damiana, nightshade plants or hemp. In addition to a very rapid onset of action, the amounts used in inhalation are also lower than when taken orally. When absorbed through the mouth, about 3 dried mushrooms are usually eaten to achieve a state of intoxication. 1 gram of dried mushrooms contains about 1 to 5 milligrams of iatric acid and 3 to 10 milligrams of muscimal. According to Hager's manual, 10 milligrams of muscimal already led to symptoms of poisoning during oral intake. Another option is to soak 1 or 2 fresh mushrooms, or 1 to 3 skins per person in water, milk, or alcohol for several hours and drink a small amount of them. The number of fungi indicated to achieve a state of intoxication is very inconsistent depending on the source. Since the outproducing substances appear to be heat-stable, the mushrooms can also be cooked, and the broth can be taken. Muscimal is degraded little in the kidneys and excreted practically unchanged in the urine. Ibotenic acid has structural similarity to the glutamate or glutamic acid used as a flavor enhancer, and exceeds its effect on taste many times over. Surprisingly, a patent was even issued for this effect in 1969. Reichel describes the consumption of 10 fly agarics as a deadly toxic amount. According to Hager's Pharmaceutical Practice Manual, the fatal dose for an adult is over 100 grams of fresh mushroom, approx. 10 dry matter. In addition to iodonic acid, the fly agaric also contains low levels of bufadienine. Bufadienine is known as an ingredient from the defense gland secretion of various toads, but apparently does not play a role in the toxic effect of the fly agaric. It also occurs in the yellow tuber leaf fungus Amanita citrina, in greatly changing quantities, and has an antibacterial effect. For humans, it is only toxic if it enters the bloodstream directly. Parenteral administration leads to headaches, dizziness, and hallucinations. The yellow tuber leaf fungus is edible, but can't be avoided because of the existing risk of confusion with poisonous species, and in particular due to its typical potato cellar smell and inferior edible mushroom. Raw, the fungus is toxic because it contains hemolytic lectins. These are destroyed by sufficient cooking or frying. The intense red color of the fly agaric is caused by a whole range of so-called betalain, such as the orange-yellow muscarine and the red-violet muscapurpurines. Betalains are also found in many flowering plants. The yellow muscaflavin can also be found in mushrooms from the genus Hygrocybe. Some dyes also have an antibiotic effect, for example the red muscarufin. Other active ingredients in fly agaric are choline, acetylcholine, betaine, muscaridine, hercinine, uracil, adenosine, hypoxanthine, xanthine, and beta-D, and butylglucopyranoside. The fly agaric contains unusually high contents of the element vanadium, 200 mg/kg. The metal is present in the fly agaric in the form of a special compound called amavadin. It is repeatedly claimed that most of the toxins are in the hat skin. However, there is very contradictory information about this in the literature. Some authors also want to have found the highest content of psychoactive substances in the meat and slats. A detailed overview of the ingredients, toxicology, biology, and ethnomycological use can be found in the review by Mitchell et al. Toxicology Poisoning Process. Although the fly agaric is very conspicuous and hardly to be confused, poisoning occurs. In the vast majority of cases, they are not the result of confusion, but result from the misuse of the fungus as a drug. Since the fungus can be easily identified and it is also found almost everywhere, the fly agaric is one of the most widely used psychotropic fungi in the world. This circumstance has recently been exacerbated by the fact that it is mentioned in several seen publications together with the panther mushroom in this context. In order to achieve a state of intoxication, in addition to the fresh or dried fruit bodies, the hat skins can also be used. They are peeled, dried and smoked. This type of application causes a mild state of intoxication. Inhalation leads to rapid drug intake, and is usually easy to control. Nevertheless, I strongly advise against trying in this regard. Apart from the fact that the consumption of fly agarics from a certain intake naturally leads to death, the fungus is still not paid to the fatally poisonous mushrooms. The literature summarizes the symptoms of fly agaric poisoning under the name pantherina, fly agaric or iatric acid syndrome. The cause of the symptoms of poisoning is mainly the ibotenic acid contained. In addition to the fly agaric, the king fly agaric Amanita regalis, the panther mushroom Amanita pantherina, and other species, such as the daffodil yellow beet Amanita gemmata, also cause the syndrome. The LD50 value, dose in which 50% of the test animals die, for idonic acid in mice is 38 mg/kg body weight. Ibotenic acid is converted into the active component muscimol in human metabolism. Muscimol is much more effective than iotric acid and is eventually excreted in the urine. Ibotenic acid has a pharmacologically similar mechanism of action to the highly toxic atropine from the rabies cherry, Atropa belladonna. In the past, the ingredients of the fly agaric were therefore referred to as fungal atropine. An atropine-like, anticholinergic effect is manifested by greatly dilated pupils, mydriasis, warm dry skin and increased pulse rate, tachycardia. But there is also poisoning with completely opposing symptoms. In these cases, there are mainly cholinergic effects, with pupil narrowing, miosis, pulse slowdown, bradycardia, sweating, and salivation. The exact background for these actually contradictory effects has not yet been fully clarified. The fly agaric particularly influences the ability to move in a special way. The ingredients also have a strong influence on the central nervous system. At first, the symptoms are reminiscent of an alcohol intoxication. About half to a maximum of 4 hours after ingestion, confusion, speech and vision disorders, fatigue, and severe fatigue occur. Consciousness is becoming increasingly cloudy. At the same time, however, arousal states can also occur. Physical symptoms are abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea and nausea, and tremors, cramps, and muscle twitching are also common. Increased salivation can often be observed. On the psychological level, sometimes drastic changes in personality and spatial and temporal perception can occur in the further course of poisoning. Color and hearing illusions, synesthesia, as well as a feeling of disembodied floating are often described. Optical hallucinations and distorted perception of size are also typical of poisoning. A small room seems like a huge hall to the intoxicated. Small obstacles are often mastered with grotesquely high jumps. The color perception can be significantly changed. For example, the sky appears purple or rivers appear deep black. The British writer Lewis Carroll processed the intoxication effect caused by the fly agaric with optical hallucinations in the fairy tale Alice in Wonderland. From one side you get bigger and smaller from the other, explains Alice's caterpillar. A side of what? Alice thinks. From the mushroom, said the caterpillar and disappeared. As with all states of intoxication, the already existing mood and expectations of the consumer are very important for the quality and intensity of the sensations. These can be characterized by great euphoria, indifference, or fearful feelings, or depressive thoughts. Of course, it plays a major role whether the fungi were taken or accidentally to achieve a state of intoxication. In case of accidental ingestion, feelings of anxiety prevail, and also make physical sensations appear more threatening than they actually are. When the fungus is knowingly taken, most consumers get into a strong state of arousal, which is associated with laughter, crying, pronounced urge to talk, singing, dancing, but also romping and screaming by rapid, uncontrollable mood changes. Since those affected often have increased physical strength, the danger of one's own person or outsider is not excluded. Contrary to what Lewis Lewin describes, there are usually no mania attacks or violent behavior. When reviewing a large number of documented cases of poisoning, there are no descriptions in this regard. In severe cases of poisoning, delirium can occur. In most cases, a deep sleep ends the symptoms of poisoning after about 10 to 15 hours without consequences. Only in the case of severe poisoning can unconsciousness last for more than 24 hours, and would possibly be fatal without medical intervention. Usually, consumers have no memory of the intoxicating experiences, and the often dramatic course of poisoning. Despite the by no means rare use, not a single death with the fly agaric has been proven. As with many other mushrooms, the poison content varies depending on the weather, season and geographical conditions. Of course, individual compatibility also plays a major role. The described effects result from the effect of many individual components, and cannot be clearly assigned to a specific ingredient. Poisoning by the fly and panther fungus is also documented by dogs. Symptomatic were loss of appetite, vomiting, cramps, drowsiness, aggressiveness, paralysis, and shortness of breath. Countermeasures for poisoning. By taking activated carbon, the poison can be bound. Laxatives then promote the elimination of toxins from the body. Vomiting should not be caused. In the presence of severe arousal, the administration of benzodiazepines, Valium, may be useful. Of course, the treatment of a poisoned person always belongs in the hands of a doctor. For all poisonings with fungi, it is above all important to clarify whether life-threatening poisonous species, such as tuber leaf fungi Amanita phthalides or Amanita verna, were consumed. Drug treatment depends on the occurrence of cholinergic or anticholinergic symptoms. If the cholinergic effect comes to the fore with pupil narrowing and pulse slowing, the administration of atropine can be considered. Use in the kitchen. Although the fly agaric clearly contains toxic ingredients, information can always be found on its use as food, especially in areas where it is common. For example, soup was prepared from the mushrooms in the area around Hamburg, which is very rich in fly agarics. As a detoxification measure, the red hat's skin was removed from the hats. There are also descriptions according to which you can still make an appetizer in some alpine valleys from fresh, sliced fly agarics with vinegar, oil, salt, and pepper. In Japan, the fly agaric is consumed as a culinary special feature, especially by the rural population. Apparently, young fruiting bodies can be consumed without symptoms of poisoning after appropriate pretreatment. It is almost always advised to remove the hat skin by adding leaching in water from 1 to 2 days, blanching and discarding the cooking water, but also sprinkling with salt. The fly agaric is detoxified. In some areas of France and Italy, it is apparently consumed in such a prepared way without adverse effects. In Japan, there are also restaurants that offer the mushroom as a delicacy, after appropriate processing. The procedures described could well be effective, as there are indications that the highest concentration of toxins is actually in the red skin, and they are also water-soluble. A more than 20-page description of the topic can be found at Rubel et al. The authors address, among other things, the problem that several mushroom species are prematurely considered inedible, although they are quite edible after appropriate preparation and processing. Examples of this are various hot milkling and pigeon species in Russia and the spring laurel, Gyromitra esculenta, which is still considered a delicacy in Scandinavia. In this country, no one would come up with the idea of considering the garden bean, Phaceolus vulgaris, as a poisonous plant, although it is raw poisonous. The detoxification of cassava is also an urgent example of the different perspectives in different countries. Until the 19th. In the 19th century, it was known in many areas that fly agarics can be detoxified by boiling and discarding the cooking water beforehand. However, this knowledge was so thoroughly ignored that it was increasingly forgotten, and there are only a few people left for whom the tradition of consumption has been preserved after appropriate processing. Nevertheless, the author advises against attempts in this regard. In Russia, fresh fly agarics are soaked in vodka to increase its intoxicating effect. Since the possibility of genetically examining fly agaric, there has been increasing evidence that there are many different varieties of the fungus, which could also differ in the content of toxic ingredients. The scientific generic name Amanita is probably derived from the Greek Amanus. This refers to the coastal mountain range on the Gulf of Iskenderun, from which many edible mushrooms, gr. Amanitae, were obtained. The epithet muscaria has its reference from the Latin musca fly, because of the use of small sugared mushroom pieces as a lure for flies. If you believe the Germanic myths, we owe the existence of the fly agaric to the Germanic god Wodan, or Odin. Wodan is repeatedly described to the raven together with his ambassadors. For this reason, he is also called the raven god. As a god of knowledge and ecstasy, he rides on the day of the winter solstice, 21 December, with his entourage of the wild hunt across the sky. The foam dripping from the nostrils of his riding horse falls to the ground, where he penetrates the earth. Fly agarics grow 9 months later, that is, the following autumn. The ancient connection of the fly agaric with the raven god is reflected in the popular name of the fungus as raven bread. Most likely, the fly agaric is associated with the popular Japanese mythical creature Tengu. The legend about the Tengu first appeared in Japan around 700 AD. The first written mention dates back to the 13th century. The Tengu has references to Buddhism and the ancient natural religion of Shintoism. There are two different types, the Tentus provided with supernatural forces, which differ externally. One of them, the so-called Umabushi Tengu, a mixture of man and bird, has a clear connection to the fly agaric. It has a long phallus-like nose and red skin. In addition, the fly agaric is also called Benidengu, take red tengupils in Japan. Even today, for New Year's Eve in Japan, the often bright red masks of Umabushi Tengus are hung everywhere to keep evil demons away. There is the association that you are most likely to meet the Tengu when you consume some specimens of the fly agaric. Another white-red journeyman who travels across the sky to the people with his reindeer is Santa Claus. Here, too, some authors see a metaphor for the fly agaric. Also interesting is the fact that illustrations or allusions to the fly agaric are found in some Christian churches. For example, a panel of the painted wooden ceiling of Hildesheim St. Michael's Church from the 13th century shows the fall of Adam and Eve. The couple faces each other, in the middle the tree of knowledge. The background is a circular red disc with white polka dots, which is strongly reminiscent of a fly agaric hat. Both figures hold one of these white structures in their hands, ready to taste these fruits of knowledge. Famous is also from the 13th century, fresco in Plein-Courault, France. Again, Adam and Eve are depicted, in the middle of which there is clearly a large fly agaric, and 4 smaller ones, around which a snake winds. The striking mushroom has been used for many millennia as a shamanistic medicinal and magic plant to produce a prophetic trance. Rosenbaum, 1995. Information on this is available worldwide: Alaska, Canada, and other North American territories, South America, and Europe. Probably the ritual use of the fungus together with the first Aborigines reached the American continent via the Bering Strait. The tribes in the Canadian Mackenzie Mountains have the hallucinogenic use of the fly agaric, as well as in the Maya, who called the fly agaric Aculjacox flash fungus. In Guatemala and Mexico, the term cacuelga with the same meaning exists in the Quiche language. The fly agaric is widespread practically throughout the northern hemisphere, and has been used almost everywhere for ritual acts. Even rainwater, which collects in the upwardly curved hats of adult mushrooms, is said to have psychoactive effects. The resulting cold water extract was called dwarf wine. Some authors see it as a soma drink, which is described in ancient Indian traditions Rigveda. No one knows to this day what composition this mystical intoxicating potion had and whether there is a material equivalent for it at all. Soma is described in the Vedas as a liquid obtained by pressing. The underlying substance comes from the mountains, and is related to the moon. In all descriptions, it is described as red, fire, or sun color. A mention of characteristics such as leaves, root, flowers, or seeds is completely missing, which is why Wasson concluded that it must be a fungus. However, he was finally convinced by text passages in which it is said that the soma pulls through the body, and swollen priests piss soma. There are authors who even associate psychedel mushrooms, such as fly agaric, with the beginning of religious sensation. An interesting source that shows a variety of theses regarding possible connections between mushroom cults with psychedel mushrooms, but especially the fly agaric, and the major world religions, is the book The Magic of Mushrooms by Clark Heinrich. Presumably, the fly agaric is still used by shamans for their travels in some areas of Siberia. As is often the case, however, clear reports are missing. Interesting is the description of a combination with the small-flowered willow floret, Epilobium angustifolium. There is a report of a stimulating effect rather than a dream-demanding effect. From a medical point of view, there is no explanation for this. Roch describes a traditional recipe for an incense at the time of the winter solstice Rauhnacht, from northern Germany. This contains in equal parts fir needles, juniper needles, spruce resin, and mugwort herb in addition to the psychedel henge seeds, hemp flowers, rabies cherry leaves, and dried whole fungi of the fly agaric. The ingredients are sprinkled into powder grated over glowing charcoal. Apparently, some Russian cosmetic manufacturers use the fly agaric in their care products. There is no pharmacological basis for this either. The fly agaric is a symbol of happiness. Today, the fly agaric is generally known as a symbol of happiness, and applications in this regard are often used. Meanwhile, there is an unmanageable number of everyday objects: table lamp, money box, dice game, cups, book covers, or fabric mushrooms in the form, or at least with the color combination of the fly agaric. Historically, there is no connection between its physiological effect and its use as a symbol of happiness. In the 18th and the 19th century, the term lucky mushroom appears for the first time. However, it had a different meaning than it is today. In analogy to the usual growth of the mushrooms, it was seen as an emporcumling that seems almost like a fungus overnight out of nowhere. Only in the second half of the 19th century. In the 19th century, this meaning changes and becomes synonymous with the lucky child, that is, a person favored by happiness. Today's popularity of the fly agaric is due to the simultaneous appearance of the first postcards, or greeting cards. With their increasing spread and popularity, mushrooms first established themselves as congratulatory motifs, before the characteristic fly agaric finally begins its triumphal march as a motif. After 1900, the fly agaric is the only motif and adorns countless greeting cards. However, its distribution as a symbol of happiness on the European continent is not uniform. In addition to the fly agaric, other mushrooms, such as the porcini mushroom, the chanterelle, and the mushroom occasionally appear on Christmas or New Year's cards in various countries. Why the fly agaric became a symbol of happiness may be due to its familiar color pattern. The colorful hat has a symbolic effect like no other type of mushroom. In Asia, it is above all the shiny lacquer porling, Ganoderma lucidum, which has enjoyed a high reputation for thousands of years not only because of its medicinal properties, but also as a symbol of happiness. Since spruce porcini mushrooms, Boletus eduli, and fly agaric have very similar location requirements, Fly agaric mushrooms are considered good porcini mushroom indicators in history. The cultic use of the fly agaric is probably already very old. In view of the still common use of the fungus by the native strains of Chukchi, Koryaks and others, it does not seem unlikely that some rock carvings on the Chukotka Peninsula in the far northeastern Russia will be the fly agaric. The rock carvings were discovered in 1965 by the geologist N. Samorukov on the banks of the Pixabay River. During the course of some expeditions, archaeologist N. Dekov examined the area, found more than 100 different scratch drawings in about 11 different places, and published his findings in a book. In 2000, a Golan-Evan extraordinary film called Pixabay. This shows the petroglyphs, the natives and their traditional consumption of the fly agaric as a drug. Dekov estimated the formation of the petroglyphs to a period from 1 millennium BC to about 500 years AD. However, this is not undisputed. Further information can be found at Devlet and Kiryak. Probably the first written mention of the fly agaric under the name fungus muscarius can be found in 1256 in the writings De Vegetabilibus by the monk Albertus Magnus. One of the oldest sources, which mentions the fly agaric in particular, is the herbal book by the Dr. Johannes Hartlieb from 1440. In many ancient sources, the fly agaric is described to prepare a brew toxic to flies. The fungus probably contains ingredients, such as 1,3-dioline, which are attractive to insects and especially flies. In the past, fly agaric soaked in sugared milk were used as fly traps. As soon as the flies snack from the milk, they become motionless. In all probability, however, the insects will only be stunned by this, and the supposedly dead flies would recover after some time if they had not already drowned. This connection also has a special connection to its naming as a mushroom of flies. Albertus Magnus already speaks in the 13th century from the mosquito sponge. Because of its characteristic appearance, the fly agaric is one of the fungal species that can be clearly identified in Hieronymus Bach, 1577. He also refers to the mushrooms as mosquito flood. Another explanation, which is often used in connection with the flying mushroom, concerns his assessment as a mushroom of the devil or devil's hat. The devil and the flies are closely related to each other. The flies, as the devil's hosts, as beings in whose form the physical dwells almost unnoticed near man, and occasionally takes possession of him. If this happens, man is obsessed, infested with flies, and foolish. The connection of the flies that take possession of a human being and the state of drunken confusion also exists in France, England, and Russia. For this reason, the fly agaric was also called a fool's sponge. However, the latter name is mainly related to other fungal species, such as the pointed conical bald head, Psilocybe semelanceta. The use of the fungus for insect repellent has also been described from some areas of Sweden. According to a description from the 18th century. In the 19th century, fly agarics were crushed and loopholes were painted with the fresh juice in which bedbugs were suspected. There are reports from France that individual mushrooms were left hanging from the ceiling as natural flycatchers. Another explanation for the name refers to the fact that the mushroom taken gives the impression of flying when intoxicated. Such use is likely to be ancient and date back to the Stone Age. Strangely enough, however, old writings lack evidence of its psychoactive effect. This will only take place in the 18th century mentioned by the Swede Philip Johan von Strahlenberg. When he becomes a prisoner of war in Kamchatka, he witnesses the use of fly agaric by the locals several times. He also observes the repeated use of urine, with the psychoactive ingredients contained therein. Since the substances in question leave the body undestroyed, the urine was collected and used several times, up to 4 times, by other people to achieve a state of intoxication. Such use raises some questions. In our culture, the intake of urine is not exactly common. This should be all the more true for drinking foreign urine. So how did you even come up with the liquid excretion products to be taken back? An explanation for this could come from the observation of reindeer. The animals not only like to eat fly agarics, but are apparently also attracted to the mushroom urine and also lick it eagerly in the snow. Perhaps at some point someone got to the bottom of this observation, took his own mushroom urine, and was amazed to find that it could again achieve a state of intoxication. Another reason is probably that the intoxication generated by the urine is described as less side effects. Presumably, the mushrooms in the areas concerned were also rather rare and therefore expensive. Apparently, financial aspects also played a role in ensuring that only wealthy members of society could afford direct consumption. The only European area in which the traditional use of fly agaric still exists is Catalonia.